So you all are in for a good treat. We are here today hearing from Peigh, whose background is really where he went with his MBA was into advertising, running an ad agency in a public group. So marketing was definitely, that aspect of marketing was key to where he spent much of his time. But more recently, Terry has kind of shifted and he has left Interpublic Group and has started to do a lot of board service. And actually, I should note that he's been working on boards and social impact work since he was at Booth. But more recently, this has become a greater focus for him as he's moved out of his prior career. So we're here to learn more about your journey, Terry. So thank you for being with us. And we're excited to learn about how you've worked on these boards, big and small, and how your marketing skills have really helped prepare you for that. So to start off, could you talk about your journey since Booth and really how did Booth help prepare you for your years of both being on boards, giving back to the world, as well as your professional career in advertising?
Great. Thank you. And welcome everybody. And for those of you dialing in, thank you for doing so. First of all, big thanks to the folks at the Kilt Center and Standy Center for putting all this together. And it's nice and fun for me to be involved and to kind of share some experiences with everybody. I think we're going to take some questions down the road. So as you have questions, please do. And after all of this, should anybody be interested in talking more to me, my email is very simple. It's first initial, last name, TPEIGH @me.com. And feel free to send me a note or give a call or whatever, and happy to chat more. My background from Booth is actually an interesting one. I actually came to Booth, believe it or not, as a film major in college. And I went to Booth straight after college back in the day when you could go straight in. Needless to say, I was a bit of a fish out of water being a creative guy at the University of Chicago. But it was a wonderful experience for me, and it really served me well as time went on. When I left Booth in '76, I immediately began working for Foot Kona Belding, a global advertising agency, and was with them for a billion years. And just out of serendipity, started doing a lot of global work and representing global clients and traveling the world and understanding cultures and figuring out how best to market on a global platform versus just a domestic one, which in itself is its own set of challenges. After a bunch of years, I was asked to become head of corporate services for a kind of a mini holding company that we had. And this job really became a very, very different job than what I was doing before. Before I was doing nothing but kind of classical marketing and communications work. In this job, I was managing real estate, IT, shared services, all corporate services, board relations, and HR. I mean, all things that I had never really been trained in specifically, but clearly a chapter of my life, which lasted 5 years, that drew heavily on my time at Booth, because I was heavily into a lot of finance work. And when I was at Booth, I also had I kind of had a double major, both marketing and finance. So it drew heavily on my finance work, especially in the real estate world and shared services world. So that was a great piece of experience for me, and a kind of a career left turn, but in a valuable one. After that, for a bunch of years, holding company was sold to another holding company, and I kind of re-entered on the marketing side, and it was managing global clients, actually helping win global clients and then managing them. And a big part of that challenge, obviously, is pulling together teams of people from around the world and driving a spirit of collaboration and support for each other from multiple disciplines, being sure they're connected virtually and often reality. Often we would have teams from 25 different countries working on a particular project. So I was in charge of kind of finding these people and managing these people and helping be sure that we were delivering the right communications program and making money while we're doing it. So and that took me up until the virus. Winding back the clock to what Katie had said, actually, I kind of entered this world of the nonprofit world my last year at the University of Chicago. Trying to make a few bucks to pay some bills. I saw an ad in the paper for a job at the community, what's called the Community and Family Studies Center. No longer there, but it's part of the sociology department of the university over on 59th Street in Blackstone. It was a group set up years ago to try to work with organizations like the USAID as part of State Department and use their funding to help educate global health workers who would often be brought to Chicago, to the university, to be trained on how to use mass media for social development. Since I had a big background in mass media, I took on this job where I was training people from all sorts of countries. And it was an accredited program paid for by USAID to train people on how to use radio and TV and print and what have you. This is kind of prior to the digital revolution, but how to use these medium for advancing social causes, often women's reproductive rights, family planning, child nutrition, immunization, things of that nature. As part of that job, we did a training session in Kenya where I was asked to kind of move to Nairobi, outside of Nairobi, for a couple of months and train a bunch of people there, and that worked well. And one thing led to another, where I did another USAID State Department job for a few months, where I took a leave of absence from my advertising job and traveled Southeast Asia for a couple of months, doing an assessment on the contraceptive programs that, believe it or not, your tax dollars and mine are paying for to help control population in some of these countries. So, and then all throughout that time period and for the next bunch of years, I've served on a bunch of nonprofit boards, and specifically targeted to use my experience as a marketing person and a communications person, and most importantly, as a strategic marketing person. I never got deeply involved for a lot of reasons in the actual development of the messaging, and I would opine on occasion, but I was trying to work higher up in terms of the positioning of the organization and the messaging or the marketing strategy and the communication strategy that needed to be done. Because once those things are done well, once those bricks are laid in, then everything else tends to flow a lot easier. And so a lot of my focus for the last jillion years in these boards is bringing that kind of thinking and discussion to the organization, which we'll talk a bit more later on. These organizations often desperately need that kind of help for a lot of reasons. So, and that brought me to today.
Thanks, Terry. Fascinating how many various experiences you have, and really impressive, I think, that you have your career doing, finding ways to give back at the same time as pursue your professional career. Let's talk a little bit about marketing. So we talk a lot at Booth about the importance of marketing in being a role in which you learn to work cross-functionally. Can you talk about maybe some examples of where that kind of comes to life, or more or less kind of how you've had to do that in your various careers, whether it's on boards or more so in your professional roles?
Yeah, I mean, working cross-functionally and cross-culturally, I would add, it had been a huge part of my life for the last 25 years at Interpublic. A big part of my job was to say win and manage these global accounts, different than the traditional model of a marketer going to a McCann Erickson or Foot Cone Belding or Leo Burnett and hiring them to do their traditional advertising, and then going to a digital agency to hire them to do digital, and going to an experiential agency to hire them. I mean, that's still done to some degree, but the model we put forward at Interpublic and had great success with was one where we say, bring it all to at the holding company level, and we will manage all of the disciplines that you have, and in so doing, provide a better service that's more efficient and actually is actually cheaper. By us having our hands on the control of multiple disciplines, we could assure that a single point of view for the brand was being represented across all the agencies. The reality is, if you don't have that, and you've got, let's say and I've had clients who've been having 15 different marketing channels, marketing services channels in execution. And often they would have 15 different agencies. And trust me, when you do that, you have 16 different points of view on what the brand should be about. And you've got way too many people fighting for a space at the table to have their point of view articulated. And then there's a lot of internal politics as to who's running what, who cooperates with whom, who shares what with whom. And often it's not very productive. It actually can often be quite destructive. So some clients have bought into establishing these relationships at the holding company level, or even at a very large advertising agency like McCann Erickson, and having multiple disciplines managed by one person to assure a single point of view on the brand. So doing so then requires pulling all these functions together and having them operate, in a collaborative way. I mean, the biggest lesson I learned, especially working with my global clients, where we had to pull in people from, say, dozens of countries sometimes, is that it's not right for everybody. Not everybody wants to collaborate, and I guess that's patently obvious. But even when you ask people to do it as part of the job, some people are really good at it, especially when it's cross-functional, because they recognize the future for them is often being able to work on a cross-functional basis. And, a traditional advertising guy may be very interested in learning about public relations and learning about digital and learning about experiential and learning about sports marketing. And those are the people that we would often seek out, those who are really open and receptive to working across multiple disciplines. There are those who aren't. And a big part of my job, honestly, was to find those who are and those who aren't. And those who aren't, we give them our best wishes and we push them aside, and we take on those that want to work collaboratively. And that's where a lot of the art comes into play, is really assembling the team and assembling the right team, and then keeping these people motivated. And doing it cross-functionally has its own challenges. Doing it cross-culturally and cross-country obviously creates a whole lot of challenges. And we were working very aggressively on finding the right opportunities to bring people together physically and bring them together digitally and virtually, so that people, their voice was heard. And also at the same time being very, very sensitive to cultural issues. One of the clients I worked on for a bunch of years and helped win was a Saudi petrochemical company, and dealing with a very Muslim-oriented organization and working in places like Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Clearly opened my eyes to a lot of cultural issues. But learning how to manage that with a Muslim world and a non-Muslim world, dozens and dozens of challenges came up with that. I found them all to be interesting, and I learned a lot from them. I learned an awful lot from them. And going in and being receptive to understanding these kind of cultural differences and learning how to adapt to them was a big part of, I think, a lot of what I was doing.
That's great. And I think it aligns well with what Booth promotes a lot these days, which is the multidisciplinary aspect of marketing and really just the business curriculum overall. Let's talk a little bit about your board service. When did you start? You mentioned earlier that you started while you were you were finishing the MBA program, but what prompted you to, besides the, looking for an extra buck, why did you continue to serve on boards? Kind of, what was your purpose and why?
From my work at the University of Chicago, I mean, I enjoyed what I was doing. I enjoyed meeting other cultures. I enjoyed contributing to, not to sound sappy about it, but I enjoyed contributing to solutions for big societal problems. I felt it was a good way for me to, employ my marketing skills. And one thing, I guess one of the major themes I would have for everybody today is that you may be surprised, perhaps or not, but you may be surprised how much of a great need there is for nonprofits to have someone at the table who really understands marketing and someone who can provide terrific help on that front. A lot of these boards are filled with lawyers, accountants, finance people, scientists, philanthropists, educators, academics, but there often is very, very little in terms of kind of classical understanding of marketing and what marketing should do. At the same time, while there's that dearth of marketing expertise, there's an enormous need for this amongst nonprofits. Every single one that I've worked with, and I started actually joining boards about maybe 4 or 5 years after my Booth time, is that almost all these organizations have a great need for it. They're very, very good at providing the social services that their organizations need. I mean, they're very, very strong at that. But the typical composition of these boards with lawyers and accountants and economists and academics and philanthropists tends not to create much of a knowledge base or a good knowledge base for managing and thinking about marketing. So there's a huge need for this, and I always responded well to that huge need. That when I got on these groups, they wanted to hear what I had to say. One of the common problems that I've seen in actually a lot of these boards is the classic mission creep, where especially these organizations that are driven heavily by academics, is that as the academic collaborative spirit tends to keep everybody's voice and vote at the same as everybody else, there's often a drive to keep on expanding into, why don't we try this, why don't we try this, why don't we try this? And after a few years, a lot of this becomes a mess, and it takes the organization away from its main point of view. So I spent a lot of time with a lot of these boards on trying to better establish what is the core purpose, what are the boundaries of what we want to do, and equally importantly, what do we not want to do? And getting them to answer what do we not want to do is amazingly powerful in clarifying some thinking as to what their core is, and then actually executing that core and those boundaries going forward. So I think with almost every organization I've been involved with, that's been a big part of what I've contributed and what I've enjoyed. I think another thing that kind of drove me to get involved with these folks is that I quickly learned that I was on a board and having board experiences and having experiences with the executive management of these organizations. A lot of really, really smart people and a lot of really talented people. And I came to quickly value just having that exposure to people that I would not normally have exposure with. I mean, on one of the boards I served on for 9 years, and I recently had to go off it just because the board charter requires me to cycle off. One of the people we had on the board was a MacArthur Genius Award winner. I mean, and just fascinating to hear someone like that talk. On that same board, actually, we have the Dr. Fauci of South Africa, who I read about almost every day in the New York Times. One of the leading epidemiologists and scientists on the virus and on HIV. So you get exposed to a lot of really, really high-powered, big thinkers and global change agents, which I've always found fascinating, and it just it's become a really good learning exercise for me. It also provides you a window into important social issues and kind of global development issues that you may not be exposed to. And I just found that to be interesting. I just, starting from early years, I've always had kind of a global view on a lot of things. I spend more time reading New York Times and Washington Post and The Guardian than I do reading, the Chicago Tribune. I just find it interesting to learn about what's happening in the world, because it's a complicated place, obviously, and a lot going on. And being on these boards has exposed me to a lot of important kind of global development issues and what smart people are thinking needs to be done, and at the same time allowing me to have a seat at the table. The last thing I'll say is that I got my first board when I was probably 25 or 26, and I was the youngest person on that board by 20 years probably. I did a job with the State Department where I was the youngest person by 20 years. I just found that boards can be really receptive to taking in a young person who has marketing experience, because they do value that so greatly. So I've never kind of had much of a problem, because what I often found out also is that and the reason I've been on a bunch of these boards is that one has often passed me to another. A gig I did with the State Department in Southeast Asia got me acquainted with a guy who became chairman of a major organization in Washington, D.C. So I did that for 10 years. I was the vice chairman there. That led me to another board. That led me to another board. That led me to another board. So making these connections kind of gives you a chance to kind of move around and experience new things. So literally every board I've ever been on has kind of come about because of a connection with other people. So So that's why I do what I do.
It's impressive. I wanted to ask you, so I have a couple questions. We also have a very engaged audience. We have several things coming in. But before we get there, what have you learned in your board service? And you've already alluded to this somewhat, having a good global perspective, but how did that help? How did serving on boards help you in your role with Interpublic or other ad agencies? So in your career?
And this might be specific or unique to me, but because I think, literally every board I've been on has a global perspective, and dealing with an organization that operates globally, operationally and strategically has helped me, because it just kind of sharpened my mind, if you will, on how to deal with marketing questions that exist on a global scale. And once you take a marketing challenge out of the U.S. or in addition to the U.S. into other countries, the challenges can multiply exponentially in terms of what to say and how to say it, and when to accept one country's message for other countries and when not to accept it. So I learned a lot on multicultural marketing, through my time on all of these boards.
Good. Broadening perspective can be a very valuable experience. I'm going to start off with some of the student questions, and then we can come back to some of the things that we had talked about prior. So is it Shazia? Is that right? And if you would like to come off mute and ask the question yourself, you're welcome to raise your hand, but I'm also happy to, I'm going to give you a second to decide on that. I'm also looking to see if I'm scanning through the names. I'll go ahead and ask it, but please, for those of you who also added to the chat, I will invite you to raise your hand and ask the question yourself if you so wish. Outside of board service, how do you recommend marketers who are trying to make a difference do so through their careers, especially maybe in the early days post-booth? So what other ways can marketers, and I'll expand that to say just general managers or professionals, how can they make an impact other than their boards?
I think trying to land yourself on a board is a very, very good way of starting. As I said before, it's not a guaranteed thing that they're going to accept somebody who was 25, 26 years old, but again, these organizations are in great need of marketing help and will often respond positively. Short of that, there's a lot of board service you can do, or a lot of service to a nonprofit you can do in terms of being on the auxiliary board, and even just doing volunteer work. I mean, the one thing that you'll face with all these, probably almost every nonprofit you work with, is the challenge of fundraising. And I've tended to stay away from boards where fundraising was a big part of board expectations. One thing you'll learn is that there are different kinds of boards. There are some boards that are very, very strategic. There are some that are strategic and operational, and there are some that are heavily weighed towards fundraising. I'm not particularly good at it. I don't like doing it, and I've stayed away from boards where I found early on that that's a big part of the job. Some people love to do it. God bless them. We need to do it. And with every organization, it's always an important matter, an important part of the conversation. But if you're not keen on fundraising, you want to be sure you're talking to an organization that doesn't require that doesn't require a lot of that from a board member. But there are a lot of volunteer opportunities with nonprofits that they're glad to have the help, and sometimes that can often lead to an auxiliary board position or a full board position, and there's a lot of satisfaction associated with doing that work.
Yeah, I think you raise an important point, which is so many boards definitely have a fundraising requirement, right? A component that's part of your role as a board member, but
Katie, we lost you. You froze.
Sort of time, treasure, talent. There's so much else that you can bring to a board, including. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we got you.
Let me know. Okay. I was making the point that I think, serving on boards or volunteering your time, we have the privilege of, or many of us have had the privilege of attending booth. And I think thinking of that as that's the contribution that you can make, your expertise and your experience. So I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah.
I'm going to invite Kim Vo to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So just one other thing that just came to mind, and that is, and this is a hats off to my employers at Interpublic and at Footcount over the years. There was never a single instance over my 40 plus years of work, never a single instance where the company was in any way resistant or not wildly positive and supportive of me doing this work. And that goes back to the culture of your employer. But I think that is probably the case in the vast majority of cases. I mean, to the point where, I was a very young guy, I was say 24, 25, something like that. And I asked if I could take 2 months off to do the State Department job, which was a fascinating adventure for my nonprofit work. And they said, go with our blessing. And I think you'll find a lot of companies today, perhaps even more so than before, will be very, very supportive of that kind of work.
Thanks, Terry. I've switched my audio to phone, so hopefully even if I freeze visually, I will still be here audio. Sorry about that. Kim, I'll give you a chance to come off mute and ask your question. There you are.
Hi, Terry and team. Thanks for taking the time today. For somebody who's new, novice to board service, graduated from Booth almost 15, 20 years ago. I've been in the corporate world, but interested in giving back now. Can you give us an overview, kind of 3 parts? How to identify board service opportunities, how to match yourself and align your skills well to be considered for a board role. And then 3rd, what's the compensation models look like? Are they all unpaid voluntary or are they paid, and how to think about those?
I'll start at the end. I've yet to see a nonprofit where you're paid. So, and you should assume that it's not paid. In many of the organizations I've worked with, many but not all, out-of-pocket expenses associated with attending meetings. This one organization I was with for a bunch of years, and we'd be bringing in people from around the world. So, and the organization would pay for their flights into New York and accommodations. And when I was flying in from Chicago to New York, they would be paying for that. So often they will pick up out of pocket. As to how to go about it, I think the best way to start is what's in your heart and what's in your head. I mean, what social issues and kind of global issues are ones that you find particularly interesting and compelling. And I think once you identify that, then finding organizations that are aligned with that and that support that, gives you a trail. And then just starting to contact them and seeing how you can help on a volunteer basis and seeing what is their board structure and then tracking down the list of their board members and going out and having lunch with some of the board members to introduce yourself to them and what your contributions are. Because I mean, the way the board membership tends to work is that there's a nominating committee on the board, and their responsibility is to help bring in new people. Rarely does it come from the management of the organization. It almost always comes from the board itself. So finding out who's on the nominating committee and saying hello and introducing yourself and seeing if you can make a contribution, with board service, I think is a great way to go. But you have to really start with, what's in your heart and head in terms of, what issues are most pressing for you, where you're most likely to be, motivated and excited by spending time.
Great. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
I think this is a good opportunity to also call out that Respondi has a lot of source resources and can also offer guidance for those who might be interested in pursuing board work. So their doors are open, virtual doors. I'm going to invite Nural. If you'd like to come off mute, you were the next one in line with a question.
Hi, sure. Thanks to both of you. This is Nural Yousafzai of the local Net Impact Chicago professional chapter. I know there's many student probably chapter members here. So thanks for opening this up to the public. My question is with everybody going virtually, have you seen particularly good examples of organizations that shifted to that reality, and how to overcome all the noise and Zoom fatigue that we're seeing for just engaging audiences? Thank you.
I mean, it's clearly a challenge. I'm on this call today, and one thing I was struggling with scheduling wise is that one of the organizations I'm with was trying to hold a live meeting for their global boards in Cape Town, South Africa, and needless to say that's been postponed. I'm on a board with a group in Boston, and the day before we were flying out, we all got canceled out of that and had to do it virtually. I think it's the same challenge that all corporations are facing, and I've always found, especially since a lot of these boards meet formally, maybe 4 or 5 times a year, I've found that getting as much kind of in-person connection is really valuable, because it becomes difficult when you're only meeting 4 times a year and the first 3 or 4 meetings have all been virtual. So I think clearly there's a drive amongst these organizations to get people together, in person as much as they can. So along with these kind of the formal, 4 board meetings a year, as you're on a committee, and it could be a compensation committee, it could be a strategic committee, it could be an operations committee, it could be whatever, the finance committee, so these committees will often meet separate of the full board, and that also provides opportunities, even virtually, to kind of connect and get to know people. But it's a frustration that they're dealing with, like all corporations, and this will end soon. We'll all be back into more of a face-to-face environment, knock on wood. So
hopefully we all have that optimism right now. I'm going to invite James D'Amato to come off mute and ask a question.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. And thank you so much for being here, Terry. This has been great. Just some background. I'm part of an organization called the Board Fellows, which works with nonprofits, and we're connected through the Restandi Center to serve as non-voting board members for these nonprofits. So on Monday's board meeting, my small Chicago-based nonprofit made a goal for this year to find a marketing-focused board member really by the middle of this year. So we'd just love some tactical advice from you as far as ways of finding folks that might fit this job description, and some good ways to keep them engaged as well.
Yeah, I think your presence on this call probably gives you a great avenue to find it. And I would think Booth is a great place to start. I think, letting them know of this opportunity. There's got to be dozens of people, I think, through the Restandi Center or through Kilts that would be very interested in getting engaged and having a first shot at it. So I think, I don't think it's a hard sell. I think, through connections at the business schools and marketing schools of universities, I think you're going to find, especially these days, there's just a growing awareness of the importance of helping on social causes. I mean, the Restandi Center didn't exist when I was at the University of Chicago. So I didn't have that internal structure and support structure to open up doors for me and to guide me. But the fact that you're finding these kinds of organizations within universities, I think knocking on the doors at Booth, knocking on the doors at Northwestern, and I think you're going to find a lot of people who are more than happy to talk to you and offer their time. Good luck.
Again, I think Restandi can offer resources on that as well. They often connect folks. So feel free to reach out to Allie Galloway would be a good starting point. I want to invite Caitlin Rybont Bell to share her.
Thank you, Katie. So Terry, I work for the Kilt Center, but I also have a background myself with marketing and nonprofits. And so what I was wondering was, what specifically have you found that nonprofits are in most need of people with a marketing background? So what skill set is most valuable to contributing, whether it's through board service or volunteering or whatever they need? What have you found marketing wise that can be most helpful?
Yeah, I'll back up and speak to how I've always approached my professional job. which has served me well. All too often people in the quote unquote advertising business kind of are interested in just jumping to what's the execution we're going to do to solve an issue. My background, I think driven heavily by Booth, is going way upstream, and that is better understanding, what is the business strategy? What does the business need? What is the business strategy? What is the marketing strategy? What is the communication strategy? And establishing that waterfall and being able to go way up to start at the top. I think having that kind of discipline and that kind of frame of mind and thinking approach is what organizations often need. I mean, they're not looking for a marketing person to come in and help them write an ad. I mean, they may, but I don't know. I that's not what I was interested in. I was interested in working at a much higher level, if you will, a much more strategic level as to what is the organization's true purpose, and defining their role relative to their competition. All these organizations have competitors. Defining their role relative to the competition, better understanding their strengths, and then building that into a marketing strategy, if you will, and being sure that it gets followed. Building it is one thing, being sure it gets followed is 12 other things. So I think, being involved with the process of monitoring, if you will, compliance with staying within the decided upon strategic guidelines for an organization is also a very big part of it. And, creating a discipline. I'm one of the boards I was on, we created a real discipline to say every quarter, we're going to see, do we have any new programs that are inside the fence or outside the fence? And if it was something that was outside the fence, then we would have a discussion about it. But we had a discipline that allowed us to challenge that. Again, there's often a great, inclination with these organizations to expand into places where they really shouldn't be expanding just because somebody has an interest in it. And God bless them, and sometimes that leads to something that's productive, sometimes it doesn't. So, having a strategic discipline on the whole process, I think is probably the most important thing you can bring to the table.
Thanks, Terry.
What is your experience?
I come from a background working for nonprofit arts organizations, art museums, theaters, and performing arts centers.
Yep. Have you seen this? Have you seen the mission creep in your field or not?
Yes, definitely. Especially when it comes to performing arts, the line between providing arts and educational opportunities and more of entertainment that'll drive sales and increase revenue, where that line is between serving the mission for arts education and more commercial entertainment.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it. I'll take 2 minutes to give an interesting example of one where one of the organizations I was involved with is heavily involved with reproductive rights and family planning. One of the very senior managers came to the board, and thought we should be involved with climate change. Now, my first reaction and everybody's first reaction is, why are we talking? Climate change is important. There are many people addressing it, but why in the world is that relevant to some of the issues that we're dealing with? Well, it turns out climate change is very relevant because it affects migration, it affects immigration, it affects quality of life and health standards around the world, especially to impoverished people, and it often affects reproductive rights. So it took us a while to get there. So this is a great example where, the initial reaction was, this makes no sense, but in fact, it makes huge sense. And, still keep being open enough to consider what may sound like a bad idea, in fact, was a very powerful, good idea, and is now actually central to a lot of what the organization is doing. And they were years ahead of everybody else by embracing it for their kind of work.
That's a great example. And actually, that's perfect. I was going to ask you for an example next. Do you have, can you think about one time, what's something that stands out for you in your past where you've made, that you're, I guess, especially proud of, where you were on a board and you were able to make a difference? Could you kind of share a story about that?
Yeah, probably the one I spent most time doing and had great success with was dealing with just that. Where's the fence on the board's mission? This is a very prestigious global health organization that has, I was often, seriously, the least educated person in the room. And I mean, the quality of PhDs from this organization and in global accolades is mind-numbing. And again, there was often a push to do things that were personal missions by people, which were to be applauded, but may not be right. So I spent a couple of years with an internal team, building out the I keep on calling it the fence, but you know what I'm talking about. A set of guidelines as to what's important to us, what we want to be about, and what we don't want to be about. And having created that was really, really important. Another one I've been involved with much more recently was an organization where I felt that the way they were posturing their service was very operational. And it's the old adage in the marketing world about, do you address the benefit or do you address the features? And they were all about addressing the features, kind of like the tactical things that they did. But if you will, the higher order benefit, the real contribution to society wasn't being reflected in their communications. And this group does have a huge impact at a high level on a major societal challenge. So I worked with them and pushing them much more towards, don't be afraid to kind of lay claim to the significant global life-changing importance of what you do, and not just the fact that you're helping a few people get a job. And that was a bit of a eye opener, and I think helped put them in a better place to operate as a much more greatly important organization, and to help them fundraising, because all of a sudden their mission was really, really important as opposed to just a tactical mission.
Thanks, Terry. We have time for a couple more questions, but before we do that, I wanted to quickly, we want to get your feedback from today, your experience here on this chat. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to quickly fill out this event survey, we'll also have a chance to give more qualitative feedback. If you'll receive, I think we're going to have it right there in the chat. There's a link to a longer survey if you want to share more thoughts. And if you fill out the qualitative survey, we have a few giveaways. We give away a few gift cards to incentivize you and get you to share your thoughts. So, and I just want to take one last call for questions. I have one more for you, Terry. I guess we can do one of two things. I'm going to give you a choice. First of all, either talk about just what you think makes for a good leader, so just very broadly, or alternatively, what kind of closing advice do you want to share with, knowing that many people on the call are interested in board service, some have a marketing background, some do not. So either what's your closing advice or what's your sort of philosophy on leadership?
Yeah, I'll deal with the second question first. I think when I was very early in my career, I was unsure whether or not my voice would be listened to, and actually I was quickly surprised and thrilled that people really did want to hear what I had to say from a marketing standpoint. Don't underestimate the value of your contribution to these nonprofits. As I say, they tend to be comprised of people, very smart people who are not very experienced in this world. And then you meld that with the fact that these organizations are often in great need of kind of marketing thinking. That opens the door very, very wide for a contribution that a young, smart person can bring to the table. And I think to your first question about leadership, I've always found that I think I've always been kind of born as a collaborative person, and that's been a lot of what I've been doing over the years is learning how to bring people together and keep people working together, and doing it cross countries, cross culturally, cross discipline. It's created its own challenges, but people are people, and I think learning how to listen to people, find ways of giving people the right opportunity to express their point of view, and at the same time developing a process that will lead the organization to a to the right answer, which may not be necessarily the immediate consensus of people, but at the end of the day, having a clear point of view and a rationale as to why that's the right way of going. I've always found that approach works well, and doing it with a smile and kindness.
Kindness is definitely something that we could all use more of, give more of, and use more of. So thank you, Terry. Well, with that, I want to just again tell you how grateful we are that you were willing to share your time and stories and insights today. And it's a perfect example of where, as an alum, you are in a position to give back, and that you have a lot to share with your story and your advice. So,
And
thank you on behalf of this whole group.
If anybody has any questions, again, email us tpeigh, TPEIGH @me.com. Feel free to send me a note, or Katie's got my phone number, and happy to take a call and do what I can.
Thank you. And thank you again to Restandi for their partnership and collaboration on this event. And thanks to all of the team members, both on the Kilt Center as well as the Restandi Center, for all the work you all have done to make this possible today.